Hello and welcome to another episode of the Digital Den podcast. I'm joined by the one and only Richard Arnold, Good Morning Britain presenter, formerly Strictly contestant, and very much an actor too. Richard, it's fantastic to have you on the podcast. From acting, presenting, and even having your own show, you have really done it all. How are you feeling?
Ah, well, do you know what? That's the most flattering intro I've had, Shayne, in the last sort of 25, 6 years or so of being on the box, and oh goodness me, even longer than that in radio. So thank you. You've flattered me from the outset. To be brutally frank, it's blowing a gale down here in North London at the moment. I don't know what has happened with our weather, but they always say never cast a cloud till May is out, don't they? But there is a bird's nest that's just blown down. I'm happy to say that it was egg free, but there's a bird's nest that's blown down. And my dog and I just inspected it. I thought it was debris from swooping up earlier at the weekend. I got to tell you, Shane, I had no idea about the workmanship involved in a bird's nest. I mean, it's extraordinary. I may give it to my colleague Charlotte Hawkins to wear next time she goes on one of her horsey gigs as the season kicks off. But yeah, we're all good here. We're I think like many people, we're having hunkered down for so long, and rightly so. We are now sort of emerging, blinking into the light again, and the end of the tunnel seems to be getting a little bit closer. So we're in thoroughly robust and good spirits. So.
Glad to see. I mean, something just popped up on my phone that new lockdown easing restrictions are coming. How do you feel about that?
Well, delighted. I think for a lot of people who weren't caught at the raw end and at the front of the engine of this insidious pandemic that we've obviously all been dealing with collectively since, well, last March, it's twofold, because all we had to do really was stay inside, keep safe, and obey the rules. And it's interesting that once you emerge from that sort of construct and those restrictions, that adding even the simplest of layers back to your life, be it meeting friends in a pub, of course, which we can soon do indoors as well. So here in England, at least. So it's weird, because our worlds have, all of our worlds have been so reduced and diminished that, like I say, just adding the simplest of layer back is a fascinating one. And it's something that's been the subject of a lot of conversation. Obviously, at Good Morning Britain, we cover the subject every day. But personally, a lot of phone calls and a lot of conversations and Zooms that I've had with mates. We lived, large, if you like, before all of this, like many people, and now we're adding the simplest of layers back. It's a bit like, oh wow, okay, yeah, you're sort of negotiating that. It's very weird. I think as humans, which is the wonderful thing, it's the one thing that the stats don't factor in, of course, is that we, the human spirit is, is predominantly indomitable. I mean, life always finds a way, but it's extraordinary how quickly we can adapt as well when our circumstances have been reduced to the point where, if I'm honest, I think my brain started to run to atrophy sort of after about 3 or 4 months into the pandemic. But like I say, it feels like that, that we're nearing the end of the tunnel, and I feel very lucky that aside from a handful of friends and colleagues, managed to sort of weather it. But I think it's been a challenge for everybody on every level. And I think particularly in the entertainment industry, which has been covered quite a bit, obviously, we all consumed a great deal of entertainment, films, television, and music during the pandemic. But I think we've perhaps underestimated the support, clearly, that the industry needs to reboot itself. And lots of colleagues of mine who work in the industry, you sort of felt that you became an irrelevant worker overnight, So it was interesting. And then another friend of mine compared it to childbirth the other day, and she should know because she's had a couple, and she said, it's almost like now that we're emerging from it, hopefully, and safely, it rather like childbirth, the reason you keep having children is because you forget the pain of childbirth. So even though January and February, I'm sure for many people, felt very, very bleak,
Yeah,
it almost feels like a lifetime ago already. I mean, I don't know how you felt, but it's extraordinary now that, as I say, we are hopefully coming out of it. That it now feels like it's gone very, very quickly. I mean, I was in Scotland. I was in Edinburgh, visiting friends from my old alma mater and family friends just before the lockdown. So that Monday after Mother's Day. So I hot-tailed it back from Alriki to back to London, and it was quite a different trip from the trip we took up on the train, as you can
Yeah.
imagine. A much reduced company of players on the train, and one thing I'm very much looking forward to is the first thing I have booked is not a fly and flop on the Costas. It's a trip back to Edinburgh to see friends of mine
Ah.
who I haven't seen, obviously, for well over a year. And I think that's going to be very emotional because it's the
Mhm.
longest I've not seen them since 1988. So it's going to be quite the hoolie and quite the reunion. So I think like everyone else, Shayne, we're just looking forward to adding the sort of the simpler pleasures back in life that through no fault of anyone's, we sort of took for granted. You know, the
Yeah.
ability just to get on a rattler and head up to Edinburgh and Aberdeenshire and see friends and pals and that sort of thing.
Mm. I mean, I know from lockdown myself that I've had to try and keep myself busy in any way I can. I got a fish tank and I got fish and everything. That lasted for about 3 months before they slowly started passing away, poor souls. But
Well, how you didn't unplug the fish tank, because that's a textbook error. I had guppies once when I first
yeah,
moved into a flat a long time ago in London, and in the end, with the greatest of respect to the guppies that I bought, the fish tank really just became a nice water feature, a sort of lovely hue. It gave the room when the lights went down at night. Well, there's no frank confessional here from me. I built a lot of Lego. I've always been a massive Lego fan. And over the years, I've been given sort of Lego on various birthdays, various boxes of different shapes and sizes. And dare I say it, I still have a lot of Lego up in the loft from when I was a nipper.
mm,
And so I actually found that really, really relaxing. And I know I wasn't
yeah,
alone. I know the lots of, but by no means am I putting myself in this league. But you know, David Beckham, John Barrowman, and I interviewed Danny Dyer on the set of The Wall. That would have been last September, and he built everything from Hogwarts
mm,
to you know, the Herbie or whatever, you know, the Volkswagen or whatever. But he built a lot, and it was getting
yeah,
to the point where there was so much Lego in the house. He had to let his wane, if you like, break it up. But yeah, I built a lot of Lego, and I did find actually that it focused the mind quite a bit.
mm,
And it goes back to that point again. It's sort of the inner child in me came out, if you like, because
mm,
in the absence of being able to control anything else, I sort of reverted to my 7-year-old type and just started building Lego. So not Duplo bricks, I hasten to add. I mean, there was some degree of sophistication with the sets, but yeah, I loved it. I loved it. I found it quite the tonic.
yeah. I mean, I remember me as a young kid, me and my mum sitting on the floor every night in the living room, and picking out a picture from online and saying that we're going to build that, from houses to elephants. Definitely one of the best moments in my childhood. What is one of the best things that you built with Lego?
Oh, wow. What is one of the best things I've built out of Lego? I used to love the Lego, you know, the town stuff and the space
Mm,
Legos at one time then. So this is well before I was lucky enough to get godsons, and my godsons are complete. Two of them at least are complete Star Wars fans. In fact, if I'm really, really honest, out of the four of them, there's probably only one, and he's the eldest. So he probably learned everything at my knee, and he became quite the Lego fanatic. So we've bonded quite a bit over that. So I would argue probably the Death Star is our greatest mutual achievement.
mm.
Uh, so yeah, shout out for Arthur, my eldest godson, who is now shockingly, my friend, shockingly turning 18 next month. And you know, when you're old enough to to have a godson who's 18, and I remember him taking, I remember taking him into the studio when our studios were on the South Bank, so it would have been the good old days of sort of GMTV. I mean, I remember taking him into studio. So wow, I mean, where that time's gone, I've no idea. But I'm glad that we've managed to square this circle, and that we're both now still building Lego at a ripened age, considerably younger than me.
Very, very wholesome. I mean, for those who are watching on YouTube and for those who are listening on Spotify, Richard's got this amazing set in his shed. How did that come about? How long did he spend building this?
Well, yeah, I can build a Death Star, believe it or not, but a shed, I can't build a shed. This was a shed that was at the bottom of the garden, and it looks from, to all intents and purposes, from the outside, for those people who are old enough tuning in or listening, it's very Swiss. It reminds me of Heidi and Goat Peter. That really does show my age, mate. Only we could do that in the edit, but I'm holding the book wide open for you today. It's very quaint, and inside, clearly, I'm not a big DIY person. There's no Black & Decker, no power tools here, but I have a desk from our friendly Swedish chums. I have a fridge that is stocked with refreshing beverages. I make no apologies for that. And a few sort of lights that I put up when, of course, very early on, it became apparent that I wasn't going to be going into the studio as much on a regular basis, and we'd be doing a lot of our broadcasts from here in the morning. So there's an oil heater on that note, because as you know, powered up and 4G'd and Wi-Fi'd up, my current accommodation is at the bottom of my garden. It was Baltic, Shayne, during the winter. So I'd run down in the morning, put the heater on, and let it sort of warm up a bit until it was a wee bit toasty. And then I'd come out here and do my bit for Good Morning Britain. So it's been a bolt hole. I think, you know, anyone who's got a man cave of sorts, or just any place that they've been able to retreat to during this, well, it's been a real privilege, actually. It's drawn a lot of great dividends. And I spend quite a bit of time in here, and I did before, because I worked a lot from here, do my writing from here, and research from here. But I don't know whether it's a midlife thing. I'd like to call it middle youth. So I'm 51 now, and I didn't realize quite how much I would love having a shed to retreat into. You know, I take a lot of comfort from it. There's all sorts of memorabilia in here from various interviews that I've done. I've got some original countdown letters from my various appearances in Dictionary Corner. I have, there's Lego here. I mentioned the fridge. Just here, there's a test card, which the gang mocked up with me and my my cockapoo Clemmy in, with a bit of an inscription on it, and that was to celebrate 25 years of being on television, national television. And do you know what? They gave me that the day before I flew to the States, and subsequently on to Scotland just before lockdown. So increasingly, as the first lockdown proceeded, I thought, oh my goodness me, that silver plate is actually a retirement gift, you know? It really felt like, as I'm sure it did for a lot of people, you know, it was like, oh goodness me, this is game over. But yeah, it's full of memories and all sorts of tat. But yeah, I do. I get a lot of comfort from it. It's been quite the bolt hole, you know, and I'm lucky to have the space. You know, I'm lucky to have the space. I retreat in here more often than really is probably healthy, if I'm really honest. But I tell you what's been great, Shayne, is I've done a lot of my interviews from here, as I said to you before. So I've had some extraordinary guests in my shed. You know, I didn't think I'd sort of sat in the shed talking to Dolly Parton or Gloria Estefan or, you know, Keith Urban, or you just, and you find yourself, rather like we're doing now, is you find yourself having interviewed these people in the flesh before, that during the whole Zoom trend, obviously, that everybody's embraced, is because people feel like they're talking to a friend, they again tend to open the book a little bit further. So and you sort of keep them for a little bit longer. And I've quite enjoyed that, because oddly, even though we are by definition sort of removed from each other, and this is a remote experience,
Yeah.
I find it's actually much more intimate,
Mm.
you know. So if we are again drawing dividends from this extraordinary time that we've all been through, then I would say, as a work tool, and I hasten to add, as a work tool, this is great. I I soon um, uh, withdrew, if you like, from Zoom quizzes, uh, Zoom parties.
Mm.
Certainly one-on-ones like we're doing now, great. But everybody was clipping each other's lines. I could hardly hear a thing. And I also feel, and again, I know it's a necessary, not evil, but this is clearly how, for the most part, people are communicating these days. But I always think that virtual to me, by definition, means almost. So it's not the full experience. So yes, I am safely looking forward to pressing the flesh again and meeting people.
Mm.
But it'll be very interesting to see how, particularly with the entertainment industry, how one-on-one interviews, or interviews as we used to do the junkets, will actually progress moving forward. I
Mm.
think we've seen certainly the last, for a very, very long time, of those extraordinary Marvel studio tours when Chris Hemsworth and the like would all sort of fly around the world.
Yeah.
I think there was a tendency to withdraw from those big tours, and all the stars going to various territories. There was a tendency for
Mm.
people to withdraw from that, because I think, in particularly with the younger stars, is carbon footprint clearly and importantly is a big issue, and the big studios get the optics on that.
Mm.
And I think, oh my goodness me, I think. I'm trying to think of the last. I think my last sit-down interview was with a big film star. Would have been Robert Downey Jr., Mr. Iron Man himself. Would it have
Oh
been,
yeah.
or perhaps it was no, it was round about then. I'm sure it was round about then. And I've had face-to-face interviews since, and
Mm.
obviously now we all go through the various layers that we need to do them safely, and have lateral flow tests
Mm.
before we interview people. And again, it's a necessity, isn't it, so that we can
Mm.
actually start moving forward. But yes, that was a very long answer. Sorry, Shane. It's a very long answer. You see what I mean about keeping people talking? It's a very long answer to basically saying I've really enjoyed having sort of the sort of stellar guests in my shed, or Dickie's
Mm.
den, as they dubbed it at work. But it would be great, and I am very much looking forward to meeting people in the flesh again. I don't think I'm alone in that, and certainly a lot of my friends who work in the theatre are absolutely desperate to get back out there and on the boards.
Yeah.
Very much looking forward to that.
I mean, you talked about you being in London, obviously, but your close connection with Scotland, which I find is quite interesting. Normally, you see there's quite a distance between people in England and people in Scotland, but to see your love, and I'm sure many Scots will love to see that, your passion for Scotland and coming to visit, and being you said your first place to visit is Edinburgh. How was it living in Scotland for that period of time when you were young?
I loved it. I moved up. My father, just to give it a bit of a backstory, was an engineer for Bristow's helicopters when we lived down south in Hampshire, and he was posted up to Aberdeen,
Mm.
because obviously Bristow's helicopters and the relationship they have with the oil rigs. So this was the early 1980s. In fact, back to the Lego, I think my dad softened the blow, because I was only 11 years old. My dad softened the blow with some space Lego. And I'll never forget the journey on the Rattler North on an Intercity 125, as they was called back then. They were called
Mm.
back then. And I remember distinctly looking out the window, and obviously I was a lot shorter then. So I remember the journey up the East Coast and how beautiful it got. And then we arrived in Aberdeen, and I grew up in Inverurie on a cul-de-sac there, as I say, from the age of 11. And I loved it. And it wasn't without its jeopardy, in the sense that obviously I'd grown up in Hampshire all my life. But I think kids are very robust.
Mm.
And I was an only child. I had a lot of love from mum and dad. Not that necessarily being an only child means that I had a lot of support from them, and Mum was very much of the mind, keep the three of us together, and like all of us, you got to go where the work is. So we followed Dad,
Mm.
and I loved it. And the first year was interesting because I remember. And obviously, I'm still in touch with my best mates, Andy and Robert. But I texted Andy the other day to say I'm coming up to Edinburgh, and we were all at Inverurie Academy.
Mm.
And Andy always tells this tale of me going into his class initially and then being taken out of his class because they thought it might be too rough. So I was like, oh, and he loves telling that story. And I look like Kenny from South Park, I had like a fur line. I was a total geek, and I make no apologies for it. My head is always far too big for my body. I look like a cartoon character. And I came up, I suppose, with a quintessentially English accent. Although my mum's sort of Hampshire, and Dad, God rest his soul, was proper London. I'm trying to do the accent. He was brought up just round the corner from me, actually, in East London. So it made for an interesting debut, if you like, when I appeared in the Diney's for the first time. With my little Adidas bag. I remember Shayne was shuffling around. I mean, oh my goodness, the image I'm painting. Anyway, so obviously it took, everyone was hugely welcoming, but it took a while for me to get my rhythm and find friends. I think it took me about 6 months to sort of, bed in. And it didn't help that any form of street cred, which clearly from the image that I've just painted for you, I didn't really have any. But I remember we were in RE, religious education. I'm not sure what they call it now. And I remember they were giving out the marks. Now, bear in mind that when I moved up there, I didn't have, well, it took a while, obviously, to make friends. And so, as you would call it, I was a bit of a swot. And I thought, well, I'll just turn my head to the lessons in hand. And so I delved into the good book for my religious education exam. And I remember the Manny Marr, as they called him, Mr. Marr, they were giving out the marks. And I remember sitting there with a bead on in a cold sweat thinking, oh, please don't come to me. Please don't come to me. Please don't come to me. And he did, came up to me and I'd got top marks. And I thought, well, you've probably set me back now. You probably sent me back about 3 months. But I loved it. I absolutely loved growing up there, so much so that when the UCA forms were rolled out and it was time to leave Inverurie Academy and then go off to, as I say, my alma mater in Edinburgh, I looked at Glasgow, looked at Aberdeen University. But I think it's interesting when I reflect on it that I didn't look anywhere else to go to university. I didn't want to leave Scotland at all.
Yeah.
I moved there, as I say, at the age of 11. And when I left home, and I left home early, I was just 17, I didn't want to go anywhere else. And I remember getting to Edinburgh and calling my mum and saying, they say that when you found a place that you really want to stay, you'll know immediately. And I think I was on a bus on Lothian Bridge or something. No, I couldn't have been because we didn't have mobiles, did we? But I remember that must have been the moment that crystallized it for me, going on a bus over Lothian Bridge. And I remember ringing Mum back at the digs and just saying, I think I've found the place. And it was Edinburgh. And Scotland's always been a huge part of my life. And it's almost like sliding doors. I sometimes think, well, what would have happened if I'd stayed down in Hampshire, but I can't think like that because it was such a rich vein to tap into that I can't imagine my life without that history. And Mum and Dad were absolutely loved it as well. And Mum loves to get back as regularly as possible. She absolutely loved it up there, and she's great. I mean, she's still in touch with loads of people. So yeah, big chapter of my life. Not to mention the young farmers' discos we used to go to in Inch. They were great. I think we'd either go in a June's or a Kenny's taxi. There were 2 taxi firms in Inverurie at the time, and we'd all sort of pull resources and hop into these 7-seater taxis and head off to Inch. And I loved all of that.
Mm,
It was great. It was great.
mm. I mean, I can only imagine you like walking in with your Adidas bag, trying to make friends with your pure English accent. So
Yeah,
I'm sure it must have been like, and the way you speak about Scotland, I mean, it's quite incredible for someone who grew up, or who was born, I think you said in Hampshire. It's
yeah.
it's uh it's very lovely to see. I mean, a couple of facts for you about Scotland, about Ivory Academy. We were doing the tour just before the school closed down. I think you know,
Ah,
yeah,
yes,
yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
the famous Ivory Academy building. Just before it closed down, we were doing tours, and I was reading the sheet. Mr. Jones, our head teacher, gave it to us, and it said that a grenade was actually found in one of the playing in the school playing field. Yeah, someone brought a pistol into the school and shot out a window. um,
I hope you're not trying to lay these charges at me. I don't know. Do you know when that was? I mean, so I was at Inverurie Academy, as I say, loose 81 to what, 86.
mm,
I went to University of Edinburgh 87. Uh, the the pistol doesn't ring any bell, but I think the grenade does. So I don't know whether that was part of
mm,
the academy's folklore back then anyway already by the time I started, or whether it happened during my tenure there. But I was gutted not to come up and take a tour of the old building. But I
mm,
actually have in my possession, which I'm thrilled, because I loved taking photos back then. And obviously we're talking 35mm stuff. So
mm.
I have a collection of about 8 photo albums from my particular time at Inverurie Academy. Uh, and each one of them is named after a particular song that was a hit at the time.
Oh
So
wow!
if you're of my age, there would be the final countdown. There would be Living on a Prayer. There would be Don't Leave Me This Way. You know, the soundtrack of I Use Suspicious Minds by Fine Young Cannibals. You know,
Mm,
just to put it into context, that was the era that I went through in Brewery Academy, and I've still got all those albums, and I have all the names as you often do with your secondary school and your primary school pals, but in this case, obviously secondary. I have all the names typed out, and I used to type them out on a typewriter.
mm.
And in the absence of any technology back then, even a dot matrix printer was beyond our ken, Shayne, right? And I've typed them all out, and they're a fantastic, um, uh, if you like, Bible of our times there. You know. So I'm very lucky to have that. And I've got some great pictures of the old building, you know, when we used to have a whiteout or whatever, you know, when, you know, the snow. Because remember,
Mm.
you know, it's a cliche, but we never used to have an awful lot of snow in Hampshire. Certainly not like we used to get, you know, when you used to get those days off at school. I
Yeah.
used to love all that. So yeah, fond memories, great friends. And as I say, you know, I can't imagine how my life would have turned out were it not for the fact that I went to Brewery Academy, if I'm really honest, and crucially, more broadly speaking, if I hadn't fallen in with all the friends I had there,
Mm.
I had a ball. I really did. I had an absolute ball.
Yeah, I mean, Scotland's such a great place to be. I feel like I'm promoting Scotland here. Scotland's
Well, we're doing a good
ambassador.
job, but there's a lot of love. You know, there is a lot of love for
Yeah.
Scotland coming from this shed in the bottom of a garden in North London. So let's embrace it,
Yeah.
because, like I say, you know, I've done a lot. I've coloured a lot in, and were it not for those roots and that springboard, like I say, got no idea where I'd end up. Probably in a skip outside Nando's, actually, which has been still known to happen on a very giddy night, just not of late, because we've been under lock and key too long.
I was just about to talk about that. NTA's National Television Awards.
Yeah.
There is this little friction between you and Good Morning Britain and This Morning winning that winning that prized daytime television show or mornings and breakfast show.
Yeah.
How is it going to such a big event, meeting all these big people, movie stars, so on and so on? How do you feel when you go to? Have you been to the Oscars, the Grammys, so on and so on?
Grammys, yes. Uh, in town for the Emmys. Oscars, no. But every awards ceremony you can possibly imagine in this country, yes. Now, the National Television Awards is a bit like a works due, really,
Mm,
because it is that time when a lot of people, get together after Christmas. It's always in January, so it's really bleak. I think this year they're hoping, fingers crossed, that it's going to be September time, obviously because it was postponed. But it's always very bleak. There's a biting wind cutting across that red carpet. So all the fans who were there, more power to them. I always wear my trademark chocolate brown's featuring again, Shayne, right? Chocolate brown fake fur coat with this extraordinary electric pink lining that I got on a fire sale for about 150 quid years and years ago, and never had the balls to wear it. And then because the awards season in the UK is genuinely Baltic, from BAFTA to the NTAs, I would wear this coat, and it became a bit of a gimmick, and people would sort of flock to it for a bit of warmth. So to answer your question, going to those dues is it feels a bit like a family affair, to be honest, a bit of a night out, because we don't get a lot of them, in the sense that I'm early to bed because I'm up at the crack of a sparrow's cough, but attending them, because over the years, I suppose I've interviewed so many people that they kind of come to you because they know it's a safe pair of hands. So I always quite enjoy the sport of a red carpet. They can be very long. The Brits, the days when the Brits had a red carpet, and of course the last one was last year, you're on that red carpet for between 3 and 4 hours.
Goodness me.
When you think that will be only a minute to a minute 15 of a VT that you run in the show the next day, that's a lot of banter that doesn't necessarily make the cut. But I love the sport of it, I love the sport of it. So I suppose, I have missed that in a way, but I think it's because I've missed being with my colleagues, more, and not just the ones I work with on Good Morning Britain, but more broadly speaking, the people that over the last 25 years you sort of floated up through the industry with. And that was something that was taught to us at journalism school. So when I did my MA in English Language and Literature at Edinburgh, and then left and came down to London and did a postgraduate in journalism at City University, which is not far from where I am now, I remember a journalist came to talk to us, and he said, that's the beauty of this industry. You will end up becoming friends, falling in love, possibly getting married, but the joy that you will experience is the fact that you end up floating through the industry together. And that's that has happened. Look, I don't want to over romanticize that, because as you can imagine, like any industry, it's fraught with minefields, and I think 99% of it is just keeping a presence, and 1% is every so often rising above and saying, well, look, I'm still here, not quite relevant, but I'm still here. So, and he was bang on, this journalist who came to talk to us. He was absolutely bang on the money, because we have grown up through the industry together. And I'm not talking necessarily about the people you always see front of house. I'm talking about the crews that we work with. I'm talking about fellow journalists. I'm talking about all of the industry across every discipline, be it television, radio, print, or theatre, whatever, film, TV. It's lovely to have that thread through. So I've missed that. I've missed the banter, and I've missed seeing people out and about. I really have. But I enjoy them. And I think some people sit on the fence with red carpets, because I think a lot of people don't particularly enjoy them. Because all eyes are on you. Everyone's looking for a frocky horror or a slip up a bit increasingly, So and yet some people really rise to it. And love it and embrace it. For me, it's all part of the sport of what I do. I take it just seriously enough to deliver a good VT the morning after. And at least I always have an excuse, because I tend to bolt from the red carpets, mate. But at least I have an excuse. If I'm bleary-eyed in the morning, I've been on the job, not necessarily the source, right? So if I screw up in a link the following morning, it's like, oh, Dickie's been out on the tiles again. Great. So it's all part of the character, mate. It's all part of the character.
We've seen those great videos of Holly and Phil on the bed, barely awake, able from the NTAs. Is that you? When you
No, and I'll tell you what, because actually this will shatter anyone's sort of illusions if indeed they can A, pick me out of a lineup, or B, have followed anything that I've done over the last 25 years. I lay off the sauce when I'm at those dues, and because I'm generally working them at the beginning, by the time I get in, the bar is either shut or dry. Um, so I don't get to sort of indulge myself perhaps as some of my colleagues who've been A, lucky enough to win awards, or B, actually tear up the rugby entire night. I mean, gone are the days, mate, when I'd sort of try and get my leg over the rope and gate crash award ceremonies. When started out in journalism in the mid-90s. I don't know how that we had the front to do that. I think I tried with a friend. In fact, I know this story. Arthur's mum and I did try to gate crash Rod Stewart's birthday party in the mid-90s. Arthur, my godson, who I mentioned. So, you know, gone are those days. I don't know if I'm that. Fortunately, you know, I get invited because I've been around a long time. Be it out of pity or just like, well, yeah, invite him, make it go away, because you know he won't stay long because he has to get up and go to bed. So more often than not, I'm back either watching the awards ceremony on television or I'm watching a box set, which sounds shocking, doesn't it? But I will have already had my caper on the red carpet anyway. So, you know, they are fun times. Actually, now, mate, you're making me nostalgic for it. I didn't think I would get nostalgic quite as much for it because I've been doing it for so long. But I think it's something that, yeah, well, certainly for me anyway. I can't answer for the whole industry, but it's certainly something that I've missed. You know, it'll be great to get back out there again.
Yeah, I mean, I talked about in the intro, of you having your own show. How did that come around, Richard Arnold?
The
Good
Richard Arnold
morning.
show.
Yeah, the Richard Arnold show.
Yeah. So I've had various shows in the past. Quiz show I was particularly fond of doing, which I did for about 3 seasons. That was Take It or Leave It. And the Richard Arnold show was a summer replacement for Entertainment Today, which we did over 2 summers when I was at GMTV, and that was great fun. And it's weird seeing your name on mugs and merchandise.
Yeah.
That was weird. And also, when they were trying to figure out the name for it, and then I got a phone call, and I was just going on a flight, oddly enough, to visit some friends in Copenhagen, and they said, "Oh, you know what? We've decided we're just going to call it the Richard Arnold Show. Just call what it, you know, call it what it is." Yeah, it was terrific sport. I loved it. I mean, the quiz show, I think, if I'm really honest, I preferred more because I like being with punters. You know, I love the gameplay. I love just meeting people, hearing their stories. That's what I love, and I suppose that's why I sort of came into journalism in the first place. It wasn't just to interview celebrities as such or whatever. I just think everyone's got a story worth listening to be quite honest. And believe it or not, unlike this podcast, I do actually pause to let them answer the question. I think my advice to anyone who, you know, was sort of stepping out into a similar field of work is, I think, you know, you sort of top and tail things with your own style, and then let them color it in the middle, you know. So that's kind of always been my modus operandi. And yeah, like I'm still here clinging like a cat to a curtain.
And you did Strictly as well. I mean, that was some great fun.
Shayne, like that touch paper, mate, and Retreat. I could talk about one thing Piers used to say when he was on the show. Mr. Morgan himself, of course, used to say, "What is it about all of you that have done Strictly? You're absolutely obsessed with it. It is a weird thing, mate, when you get into that bubble." And the first time I did it was 2012. I was in the bottom 2 the first week. I blame Love Shack, never been my most favorite song, with the greatest respect to people who do like it. Certainly wasn't my cha-cha, although it was more of a mince. Craig Revel Hall was at great lengths to make clear on the night. And I went through every arc, up and down, forgot my steps, voted back in, do whatever, dances, you know, the dance-offs. I made it to week 7. And then I was invited back to do the Christmas special a couple of years ago. And again, that's another thing where you go, wow, because when you get that call, you've got to go, well, you've got to do it. It's BBC One, it's Christmas Day, and it's Strictly. You can't say no, even if you're like, oh, I'm going to be a nervous wreck. And then you think, well, it's not live. And there's no jeopardy because you're not going to be voted off. It's just a one-off, right?
Yeah.
You've got to do it, Rich. So I did it, and I was dressed as the Grinch. I was dressed as the Grinch for hours. Hours, literally in green tights, covered in green paint, you know, daubed in everything, hair teased into a frenzy. And I did it with a lovely Luba, who's a regular on the show. And Erin was my partner before, Erin Bogue. And I got to tell you, I loved it. They coach you through the experience. They hold your hand. They have a hand on your heart. Because for me, as someone who wasn't clearly a dancer and also not a drama school kid, if you like,
Mm.
or a boy band or a girl band or an actor or anything like that. It wasn't a natural home for me, but for me, it was Saturday night, shiny floor, and it was a show I loved. And so to be immersed in it, I felt like a competition winner, to be honest.
Mm.
So I loved it. In fact, behind me, there's a picture of me and Erin, in fact, and the 2012 lineup, because it was, and even a little Radio Times cover there of all of us. I loved it. I
Yeah.
absolutely loved it. And the greatest privilege about it is, obviously, it's a cross-generational show. It's got a massive fan base, but
Mm.
you're in the arms of a professional who's given up their time to teach you, and it is incredible. I love the learning of it,
Mm.
and I love the walking down the stairs in the costumes, right? Then it was the dance you had to do, and you're like, oh no. But we did all right, I think. We, as I say, Erin and I got to week 7, and Luba and I, we were bottom of the leaderboard that Christmas. But it was cracking, and I suppose, you know, it doesn't get much better than sort of BBC One on a Saturday, you know, Christmas Day. Mum was proud, let's put it
Yeah.
that way.
Mum.
She loved it. You know?
Yeah.
And the godchildren were a little bit like, oh, Uncle Rich, what are you doing, mate? But yeah, so it's a great family to be part of. And Piers was right. I mean, people who've been on it, my colleague Ramvir did really well last time, of course, last year. And they've all been on it. Kate, Charlotte, Susanna. So I feel like I'm in good company. And when you do start talking about it, and when you've had that experience, it's nice that you've chalked that experience up, right?
Yeah.
It was a great thing to be part of, you know.
I mean, you've worked with the likes of, as we said, Mr. Piers Morgan himself, Charlotte Hawkins, Susanna Reid. You still, I see, like you've worked, but you still continue to work with them. You've got who else have you worked with? You worked with loads of people.
Garrett, Ben Shepherd. I mean, we're going way back, and you know, but and everyone very much still there, you know, in terms of the family of bases. I loved working with Piers, but I've known Piers for years anyway. He was with us for 5 years. He certainly made it feel live, and it was great sport when we were with him. And I think he genuinely changed the face of you know, breakfast television in every respect. You know, tore up the running order, and we just ran with it. Whatever stoked the coals of the nation, or who. The burning issues of the day, and he was very much, as Dr. Hillary put it, our general, if you like, leading us through the pandemic, and reflected very much how people felt. So I miss working with him, although I didn't get to work with him a lot for a whole year because we weren't allowed in the same room. So because of the pandemic, you know, I was effectively put out to pasture for a few months. But yeah, I loved working with him, and I've known Piers for years anyway, you know, and he's very generous and very loyal. So it's kind of weird to get to an age where you've been part of that breakfast television narrative, as I say, part of that fabric for such a long time. If slightly worn now as I ripen in age, but I've loved it because, again, back to that sort of, you know, you get to meet ordinary people, extraordinary people, or, you know, ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances. You get to shake the hands of prime ministers, sporting heroes, but also anyone who's in the headlines. And, you know, as we know, those headlines can be brutal and quite painful sometimes. So you get to meet people from all walks of life, and generally, I've said this before, but it rings true even now, is, you know, if people are in the news, then they're generally in the studio. So you get to meet people who, as I say, are making the news every day, and that, my friend, after so many years, never ever gets old.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a presenting and being on TV. It's I can imagine it's such a like a homely, a very acute experience, and only a set amount of people can experience it and can connect with you on the level of that. I've got one more question before we end off the podcast. Normally for my guests, I know I like to say, can you pick out anything in the room that you are, or in your house, just so
No, right, you know, and you know what, you're not going to do it because there's so much tat in here, right?
I am going to do it. I'm going to give you, it seems like you've got everything around you, but I'm going to give you a couple of seconds to grab something that you think best represents you.
Wow. Okay, I will do that. Now, I have a collection of Stetsons. This particular Stetson was from the launch of the Dallas television series Reboot, and I hosted in 2012 the party to welcome the Dallas Reboot back to Channel 5, or obviously its original home was the BBC. So Dallas, we have to end on in many respects. One, because it was my number one TV show. As anyone who knew me growing up at school, in fact, I used to cut my driving lessons short so I could get back to watch it on a Wednesday. Don't ask me, Shayne, why I didn't book my driving lessons on another day. Probably the availability of the driving instructor. But he was very patient. He always got me back in home to Dallas on BBC Scotland. Now, at this party, I've met many of the cast over the years. The late, great Larry Hagman, who played JR. Linda Gray, who played Sue Ellen, who is an absolute doll. Patrick Duffy, all of them. So they were there for the Dallas party. There were longhorn cattle out on the Thames. There was a huge South Fork arch, which for those people who've ever watched the show, that of course is the home of the Ewing family, who are the centerpiece of the show. And I grew up watching that show. And if you'd have told me when I was watching Dallas, and bear in mind, we're in the full thrust of the 1980s here. I'm living in oil-rich Aberdeen, although we didn't see a lot of the money, mate. You know, as I said, that's all the oil, but it was only on his hands when he was fixing the helicopters. But it very much epitomised the lust and the greed and, you know, the times of the 80s. If you'd have told me that I'd end up one day hosting a party for the cast and sipping margaritas with them, I never would have believed it. But as my mum and dad have always said to me, you know, it's not so much where you're at as where you're going, you know, where you're heading. And I think a lot of youngsters in particular, a lot of people, we felt so discombobulated in these times that particularly, you know, when you're young and you're feeling slightly out of joint with everything that's going on, is, well, essentially just keep the faith and go through life with good grace and manners and tequila. And you may get there in the end, you know. Love a margarita, Shayne. Gotta love a margarita. But so there are a few Stetson here. Some of them actually do fit. Like I say, I've got a massive heat. And I've been lucky enough to go to Texas many times, and I feel very blessed by that. But yeah, that probably sums me up.
Richard, it's been fantastic to have you on the show. It feels like I'm in the shed with you, talking to you face to face. I am.
Can I offer you a drink?
Of course, I take it any day.
Absolutely. No, Shayne, you've been great company, mate, and I really appreciate you taking the time out and first and foremost, inviting me to talk about a period of my life that, as we've gathered, I cherished very, very much. So appreciate that, mate, and I wish you all the very best with your own career. And where you head off to next.
Thank you so much. And I'm sure those who are watching, whether it's Spotify, Google Play, Apple, so on, are felt like they were talking to you as well, listening into our conversation, hopefully with open ears. So yeah, once again, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Be sure to like on the platforms that I said, Spotify, and follow Google Play, Apple Music, and YouTube to the Digital Den Pod. Richard, thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
I will do. If not with open ears, certainly an open bottle.